All right, happy hump day, everybody. We're on our third seminar today, and we have a great speaker today, Hector Gutierrez. Hector is currently the chair of the board of directors for the California Strawberry Commission. And Hector originally is from California and got his degree at Cal Poly, got his Bachelor of Science degree in the Ag Business Department in a major that was called Ag Management. Quickly got his PCA after that and started a career as a PCA. So he's been doing this since the mid 80s. That's a long time. He's currently growing just under 200 acres of strawberries, and also is PCA for 2,500 acres of vegetables, including about 400 acres of strawberries. So we have a really rare opportunity to hear from somebody who's been doing this a really long time. And I know that many students at Cal Poly either want to be a PCA or want to find out what it's like to be that, and so they can make decisions. Hector works for a full service retailer called Tri-Tec, which is one of the companies associated with Tri-Cal, and they provide ag products for the entire ag industry. So Hector is located down in Ventura County, and I'm going to turn the floor over to Hector. It says Linda there, that's his wife. So know that he's just using her computer for today's seminar. So Hector, it's all yours. You can share your screen, or you can start right now just without the screen for a minute, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay, were you going to share the slides from your end?
I can do that. You wanted me to do it from my end? Okay.
You can do that, yeah.
Then I will share my screen. You can just say next whenever you want to go to the next slide.
Okay, well, thanks for having me, class. I understand that your last speaker was Tom Amrine. I've known Tom for probably 42 years. We shared a couple classes at Cal Poly when I was there. I was at Cal Poly from 1977 till March of '82 when I graduated, and I quickly got my PCA license upon graduating because everything was still fresh in my mind. You can move on to the next slide there, Gerald.
Hold on. Okay.
So as an introduction, and Gerald mentioned a few of these things, I've been a strawberry grower since 1990. I've been a licensed pest control advisor for 39 years. As a grower, I farm approximately just under 200 acres, and some of that is organic production. I'm the current chairman of the Strawberry Commission, and I belong to a few different organizations. I want to give you kind of some career path background, how I got to where I am today. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, I grew up on a farm where my father worked. So I was intimately aware of the ins and outs of farming and kind of what went on a daily basis. And when I was growing up, these young guys used to come to the farm, and I used to kind of take note of what they were doing, and I'd ask them, hey, what is it that you're doing? And come to find out they were pest control advisors in a very early industry back in the 70s, and so I kind of took an interest in what they were doing, and we did have some animals on the farm, so occasionally we'd go into the feed store. And back then the feed store was also the local chemical and fertilizer dealer. And when I'd walk in the warehouse, I'd see all these products on the shelf and pallets of fertilizer, and that kind of made me curious as what all this stuff was to be used for. So from a very early age, I took an interest in what all these products were and how they were going to be used. And as I was growing up, some friends I knew, their brothers had attended Cal Poly, and I started talking to them and asking them what they were doing, and they kind of shared with me, and I had other people tell me, well, there's this industry called the Pest Control Advisor industry, and there's a need for people to advise farmers on the proper usage of pesticides and fertilizers. And so I got myself into Cal Poly, and I decided to study ag business management, or ag management at the time. I thought I wanted to learn a little bit more about the business side of it, and I ended up taking a lot of my electives in the crop science department. That's what they called it back then. And then I took some classes in the soils department, along with taking chemistry and all those classes you need to take, and botany, and everything that seems to be required. So that kind of got the ball rolling. And when I graduated, I was prepared to take my PCA license, and I quickly went to work for the Dole Food Company, and I started actually in the Salinas Valley. And what I did was for them is I was a grower representative. They had contracted growers that grew the vegetables for them, so I assisted them in planting schedules and pest management, and then production forecasting, and so I did that for probably the next 6 years, and then sometime along that path, they actually moved me to Ventura County, where I live now, and I did similar things for them here. And shortly after that, I had an opportunity to manage a strawberry operation that they had here locally. And that's kind of where I cut my teeth learning about strawberries. And so in 1990, I managed their operation, and I did that for about 4 years. And then I started managing strawberry operations for other companies. I left Dole, and I actually managed for another company for another 5 years. And in the meantime, I was doing some pest control work with the local retailer here in the area, and I'll explain what that is here shortly. And I did that for probably till about 2003, and then I formed a partnership with another grower to grow strawberries, and we did that for about probably to about 2017, and in 2006, I was contacted by Tri-Tec Ag Products, who and they asked me if I wanted to be a pest control advisor with them. And I said, well, I'd like to do that, but I'd like to keep running my farming operation. So I had to find somebody to help me manage my farm. And I did that. And then in 2017, we decided to, my wife and I decided, what, it's time for us to kind of do this on our own. So we launched another company on our own, and that's what we're doing today. We grow, like I said, just roughly under 200 acres, conventional and some organic production during the summer. And I continue to work at Tri-Tec Ag Products here in Ventura County as a vegetable piece, mostly vegetable PCA. And I've advised on vegetables from A to Z, arugula to zucchini. And most recently, I had to learn all about cotton, because now I have a grower in the San Joaquin Valley that has 75 acres of seed cotton. So I've had to learn cotton at a later stage in my career. You can go to the next slide. Sure.
Just a quick question, Hector. How difficult is it to learn a new crop?
Well, it actually can be very difficult. If it was a crop here on the coast, another vegetable crop, then it would be a lot easier. But because this is a completely different, this is a fiber crop, and being grown for seeds. So, a lot of the pests are the same that you run into, but just the life cycle of the crop and learning the ins and outs of it, and the do's and don'ts, and when to pull the trigger on the threshold levels. So there's different things you have to learn. Even though you may be dealing with a similar pest, there's different threshold levels, and different materials that are registered for that crop.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let me go to the next slide.
And, and students, feel free to stop me if you have a question. It doesn't matter if you need to interrupt me. I'm glad to try and answer your questions.
By the way, is everybody seeing the full screen, or do you see this panel of students also? I'm wondering if I can have that open at the same time.
We see the full screen.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Go ahead, Hector.
Okay, great. This is the outline, and I think this presentation, you have access to it. So, after the meeting, but so I won't spend a lot of time here, but these are some of the topics I'm going to try to cover, and some I'll try to go through quickly, and others I'll spend a little bit more time on, especially when we get to the pest side of it, and pest management and decision-making processes. And, I'd like to spend a little bit more time there just so you kind of get a feel for what a pest control advisor does. So next screen, Gerald. Actually, that young man walking through the field is a recent Cal Poly graduate that started out as an intern with us, and now is he's about to be launched into taking on some clients. So he's kind of been in training mode for the last 3 years. So okay. I wanted to give you just a little bit of a rundown in terms of the industry, and chemicals are registered at the federal level, and then subsequently registered at the California level. And in California is a lot more stringent, so we don't always get the same registration concurrent with the federal EPA. Sometimes it may take 2 or 3 or even 4 years longer, or sometimes we never get it at all. So that can be an issue, and California just seems to be more stringent. And then the Department of Pesticide Regulation is kind of the enforcement arm here in California, and then the County Agriculture Commissioner is the one who enforces it at the local level. And then your farmers or growers are issued a restricted materials permit in the county in which they operate. And and the ag commissioner, the county ag commissioner, at his discretion can put on a more stringent permit conditions if they need to. Just because of, for instance, in our area of Ventura County, we're very urban. We have a lot of urban encroachment, so we're dealing with the public on a regular basis. So there's other permit conditions that are placed on a grower's permit. And then growers need pest control advisors to make recommendations. And then if anybody who's going to be applying pesticides requires a qualified applicator license, and this is especially true if you're going to be into business for hire. So a company like ours, Tri-Tec Ag Products, because we do business for hire, someone within our staff, it's generally one of the PCAs, and I'm also a qualified applicator license holder. So someone has to register with the county, including our business license, so that we can conduct business in the county. And Tri-Tec conducts business in Ventura, LA, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Kern County. So and if you're a PCA making recommendations in those counties, you also have to be registered in those counties. So, next slide, Joe. Real quick, once you become a PCA and you're in a geographic area, you're going to become a specialist in those crops in that area. I mean, you could be a citrus avocado specialist, if that's what your customer base is, if that's what your farmers are growing, or if they're growing vegetables or strawberries, and you quickly become a so-called expert in those crops, and that's kind of the beauty of this business, is that you begin to feel a sense of responsibility with your customers and the crops they're growing, and you're actually part of their growing team. And so you become an authority on pesticides in the labels, and I'm not going to get into labels today, but you don't have to know the labels by by heart or by memory, but because of, the access to internet nowadays, you have access to these labels at the tip of a finger, and back in the day, we used to carry these big books that looked like an oversized Bible in our pickups, and we needed to look something up. We opened up the book and looked at these labels, and you had all these labels from all these manufacturers that you carried around. So it was kind of crazy, but nowadays it makes things a little bit easier. And on the bottom it says solicit services or sales for any agricultural use. And the main takeaway I want you to have here is that a pest control advisor is really a salesperson, and so you're not only are you selling yourself, but you're selling your services, the services of the company you work for, or you're selling products, and that's how you make a living in this business. So next slide, Gerald. I won't spend a whole lot of time here, but and there's a website available here that you could go on the DPR, Department of Pesticide Regulation, and see what the minimum requirements are for being a PCA. You can see on the third one, you can still do it without having a degree, but it'll make it a lot easier for you in the future in whatever career you choose if you do have a degree. Next slide, Gerald. Okay, as a pest control advisor, you can be you have to take a laws and regulations test. And once you pass that, then you qualify to take what they call the categories in which you can write recommendations in. And there's 7 categories that you can write recommendations in. And I happen to have all these categories that I took, right after I graduated. And I actually am probably one of the few PCAs that can say that I've actually used all these categories over the years in writing recommendations. And so you don't need them all, to be a PCA, but it's helpful if you do have most of them. So
if you had to choose, Hector, what would be the most important ones in your opinion?
In my opinion, it would probably be insect mites and invertebrates, plant pathogens, nematodes, and weeds. You could probably get by with those.
And so you'd drop the defoliation and plant growth regulators if you had to?
If I had to, but because I have I've done some peppers where I have to ripen up the fruit before it goes to process. I have to use plant growth regulators, and also I do artichokes is one of my crops, so we use gibberellic acid. So that's a plant growth regulator. So you would need that category to write the recommendation. And then in cotton, it requires to have you defoliate cotton for harvest. So you need to have that as one of your categories.
Yeah, so somewhat dependent on the crops you work with, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
All right.
Next slide.
I have a question.
Oh, sure.
So if you have a license, if you do license for just one category, you can do a recommendation. Like say, for example, you do insects. So you can do a recommendation for like nematodes if you don't have it?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank
Yes,
you.
You have to be licensed in the category for which you're writing recommendations. Okay.
Other questions? Moving on. All right.
Okay, I just wanted to just briefly kind of give you an idea that, we're going to be talking primarily about agriculture today, but there's other industries that use pest control advisors. And, one of them is the forestry industry. And I'm not real familiar with the forestry industry, but I know that they use pest control advisors. In the urban areas, turf and ornamental is huge. There's greenhouses that are growing plants, for home gardeners and, for landscapes and there's landscape that has to be taken care of. Big office complexes have landscapes that need to be taken care of, and there's also structural pest control. If you're fumigating houses or buildings, or maybe you've got to fumigate a grain silo, storage grain silo or something. So there's other industries that utilize pest control advisors. So I wanted you to know that in case you might be interested in something else. Next slide. Okay, where do PCAs work? I'd like to spend a little bit of time here. As I was explaining, and Gerald, when he introduced me, said that I work with Tri-Tec Ag Products, and we are a full service retailer, dealer of pesticides and chemicals and fertilizers. And we run the whole gamut. We do inspection services, and we write recommendations. We go out and we make the applications. We sell liquid and dry fertilizer. We also make beds or listing up, our farmers' farms if they want us to apply the fertilizer into their beds. We also do customers just come in just over the counter. So there might be a farmer that's our customer that doesn't need our pest control services, but he does need our products. So these are customer clients that we have that will come in and that will call us for product, and we can deliver the product to them. So we kind of run the whole gamut. And just so you get an idea, our Tri-Tec is a family, it's still a family-owned company, and we're a subsidiary of Tri-Cal, which is a large fumigation company that's across the country and also other parts of the world. So it's a large family-owned company, and we just happen to have this kind of unique little business here in Ventura County, and been branching out to the other counties nearby. So as a PCA, you could work for a retailer. You could be employed by a retailer. And normally when you start out, you might start out as being an intern, and then eventually work your way into maybe either gaining your own business, or maybe somebody that's retiring might pass on some business to you, or if they have enough business, they might say, well, this is some clients you could call on, so you could start actually calling on your own clients. The next category would be an independent pest control advisor. And to be an independent pest control advisor, you're probably going to have worked for somebody else first. You're not going to come out of school and put up your shingle and say, I'm an independent, because it takes a lot of networking and it takes a lot of experience before you can go out and call on your own customers and do pest control advising for them. They're gonna have to have a trust in you, and usually that comes through years of experience. But it can be had, and there are independents who are large enough who might hire someone right out of school to help them do scouting, and that's one good way of getting training and right in the field and working under somebody who has knowledge that can guide and direct you. The other place where you can work, and I like to call it as an in-house PCA, and that's working as an advisor for a large corporate farm or a large family farm that has enough acres that they can do their own application or contract out their application, but needs somebody in-house that could do their pest control advising. And there's a lot of large companies that do this, that they have their own staff that does their own pest control work. And many PCAs start out like this. And the fourth one is you could either work for a manufacturer of chemicals or pesticides or fertilizers, and there's a lot of pest control advisors, guys and gals that work for manufacturers, and they become very knowledgeable in certain crops, and they can either be sales representatives or they can be technical representatives, And usually they're covering a kind of a geographic area, like they might have, oversee, Southern California for a company, or, so what they do is they call on the retailers, and they're making sure that the retailers are, representing their products, and using them properly, and they keep you updated on labels and new products, and they also call on the independents, and they'll call on the in-house PCA. So a manufacturer's representative PCA, has kind of a broad base to cover. He's not necessarily writing recommendations. He's not likely going to be writing recommendations, but he's going to call on the rest of the industry. And I know a lot of manufacturer reps who started out as working for a retailer or working for a large corporate farm, and eventually they moved on. Next slide, Joe. Okay, I wanted to give you a little bit of insight as to how I spend my time. And I can't speak for all pest control advisors, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a clue as to what my time frame is like. And basically spending time scouting fields takes up about half of my time. And then writing recommendations, it takes up about 18 to 20% of my time. And I can write them from anywhere. I can write them, sitting here in my home office. I can write them at my office at Tri-Tec. I can write them from the seat of my pickup, because I have an iPad, and and I'm linked in, and I can write recommendations. I have the recommendation program on my iPad, so I can do that, and I'll show you a little bit later on a slide how that works. So and I also spend time having to meet with customers and the ranch managers and harvest managers or harvest supervisors and manufacturers reps, getting updates. And then I, attend a lot of meetings. So that's, I kind of estimated that's about what it takes, going to field days, Cal Poly Strawberry Center Field Day, that would be a meeting that I would attend. You get to know your farm advisors in your area. That's a kind of a key thing to know, is that once you're in a geographic area, you want to know who are the experts in your area, so you can call on them and for information. And they may be running test plots or something, that information that you might be interested in. And so it's good to know who your farm advisors are, and also your UC cooperative extension specialist, for the crops in your area. So it's good to know those kind of people. It's good to have them as part of your toolbox. Next slide, Joe. Okay, we're going to get into the nitty gritty now. So get into the good stuff. I'm going to talk about some of the pests that we see in strawberries. So now I'm kind of going to gear this thing more towards strawberries. But the picture on your right, this is actually two-spotted spider mite. But the picture on your right is an area of a strawberry field that's kind of weak, and it's being attacked by spider mite. And there's a lot of reasons why this area can be weak. And one of them, it could be a kind of a low area where maybe water puddles up a little bit. Or it could be an area that's near a roadway that gets a lot of dust, because mites really like dust, and they like plants that are weakened. Or it could be a variety of strawberries that's more susceptible to infestations from two-spotted spider mite. So you kind of have to look for these areas in your field, and generally once you get some experience, you can pretty much size up a field and kind of know where your mite populations are going to show up first. And the photo on your left is what you don't want to see. This is and you kind of see some of these spider mites walking around, and they're building a webbing around those leaves and around that trifoliate. And if you get too much of this webbing, the area can actually start to look of the color blue because of all the webbing. So you kind of want to try to avoid this, and I want to talk about a little bit later how to kind of try to control this. So if you can go to the next slide, Gerald. And this is the two-spotted spider mite. And this is on the right under, very powerful magnification. So you can see why it's called a two-spotted spider mite. And on the left there's some adults and some immatures. And what they do is they start colonizing underneath the leaf surface, not on top of the leaf, but underneath. And they'll start extracting the juices out of the leaf. And eventually the numbers build up high enough where they will desiccate the leaf. And it doesn't completely kill the strawberry plant, but it almost looks like it does. But you want to try to avoid this. But you can, it takes a hand lens to find these guys out in the field, and you can kind of see where these get started. But initially you're making an assessment as to what your threshold level is with these mites and how many mites you're willing to tolerate before you take action. And generally with mites, you don't want to tolerate too much because you don't want to get into a situation where you're starting to lose crop. Next slide. We also deal with cyclamen mite, and cyclamen mite can also weaken plants, but cyclamen mite's a little bit different because usually I find them underneath the calyx of the strawberry fruit, but you won't really notice them until you start to see some weakened plants. I mean, you're not going to see webbing or plants that are dusty or something to look like something's on them, but you tend to see some weakened plants, and then you start looking around and you can find these under the calyx. And they don't show up very often, but occasionally they do. Next one, Gerald. There's a third mite that can affect strawberries, and it's called the Lewis mite. And the slides here don't show up real well, but if you look on the bottom right-hand corner, it's hard to tell, but they have a lot of spots on them, and they're actually smaller in size than the two-spotted mite, and their life cycles are somewhat similar, but not alike. But I do have a slide that's going to show some differences, and you'll be able to access that slide. So next slide, please. Okay, this is the slide that kind of gives you a description, of what the difference is between these two mites. And normally in strawberries, we're dealing with the two-spotted mite. That's the normal one that's going to affect us the greatest amount of time. But occasionally the Lewis mite will show up, and Lewis mites do show up in raspberries, and if you have a raspberry crop next to your strawberry crop, sometimes you might start seeing some infestation. So that's one of those areas you kind of need to be aware of what's going on around you, on your surroundings. And like I said, they have a little bit different life cycles, but their control, if you go down to the bottom of this slide, it says predatory mites, and I'll get into predatory mites, but the same predators don't all attack the same mites. There's a preference to them. So, if you're depending on what mite you're dealing with, you have to make sure you're releasing the same predators. Next slide, Gerald. This is an adult Ligus, and usually the immature nymphs are the ones that are causing most of the problem. What the nymphs do is, and I don't have a picture of them, but what the nymphs do is they crawl around on a new flower, and they kind of do a rasping, sucking kind of a job on the very tender epidermal layer of that flower. And what it does if the numbers build up high enough, the populations build up high enough, then you'll get bronzing of the fruit. And once the fruit is bronze, it's not marketable. So, your farmer, your grower, whoever he's selling the fruit to is not gonna be very tolerant of having fruit that's bronze. And other things can cause bronze fruit. I mean, extreme heat, extreme wind, extreme cold. There's different things that can cause bronzing. Actually, I take that back. They're going to cause a little bit of bronzing, but the most impactful problem they're going to cause is going to be misshapen fruit. Gerald, if you can go to the next slide. Okay, this is misshapen fruit from Ligus Damage. And this is very unmarketable fruit. And what ends up happening is this fruit has to be stripped off, and there's a cost to having it stripped off, in addition to you're losing marketable fruit. So this can be, and other things can cause misshapen fruit. Wind, strong wind, rain, cold can also cause misshapen fruit. So you kind of have to know what you're looking for, and the way to find these guys is, I usually see them visually, because I know what I'm looking for. Or I'll take a plant and I'll take my sweep net and I'll lie my sweep net underneath the plant, and I shake the plant kind of vigorously over my sweep net and let them fall onto a, kind of a white fabric, so I can kind of see what's coming out of the plant. But there's also, and I didn't put a picture in here, but there's a beat box you can use. Like, you can use a plastic Tupperware, small Tupperware box, and put it underneath the plant and shake the plant into the box, and you can see usually you'll see the immatures that'll fall off on there. The adults are going to fly away. Next slide.
Hector, how many Ligus do you need to see before you think you got a problem?
Well, the threshold is usually pretty low. I would say that if in 100 feet you saw maybe half to a dozen in a 100-foot section, you'd probably be at that threshold level and want to be considering some type of treatment. Or if your grower happens to have a bug vacuum, be utilizing the bug vacuum to go up and down the field to start to eliminate this pest, or at least keep it in check.
And how big is that adult that you showed? I mean, that's a close-up photo. What's the size of that actually?
Oh, it's probably, I don't know, it's probably what, 1.5 centimeters?
Millimeters, maybe, yeah.
Yeah,
So the size of one of those seeds, one of the achenes on the fruit, right?
yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Pretty small. Okay, here we go.
Next slide, yeah. Another pest we deal with is a corn earworm, and corn earworms can lay their eggs right on top of the calyx, and because they want, when that first instar larva hatches, it wants to go right immediately into the fruit, and they'll actually bore a hole right through the calyx and right directly in the fruit, and you won't even know it's there. And it'll be feeding on the inside of the fruit and growing, and they get into corn, they get into tomatoes, and they can get into other crops, they get into peppers, and but in strawberries they can make that fruit unmarketable right away. And I've known cases where fruit has made it to the marketplace, and then there's a complaint because some consumer opened up a basket, cut open a piece of fruit in there, and there was this fruit worm. So you want to be on top of things, and you usually don't see this very often. You'll probably see it maybe once during the season, but you have to kind of be watching out for it, and you got to be looking out for times of when the moon is full, because most of the lepidopteran pests, they're noctuidae, so the moths fly at night, and when there's more light at night, like on a full moon, they seem to be more active. If you ever go outside your front door, you turn on the light and there are a bunch of moths flying around, the light seems to attract them. So if there's more light in your field, there's going to be more activity. It's something to kind of keep in your toolbox, knowing that can happen. Next slide. This is a beet armyworm. Occasionally we'll see this in the field too. They normally lay their eggs in masses, and sometimes that mass is covered up with a little bit of looks like little cotton, but sometimes they'll lay a single egg, but oftentimes they're in masses, and they're primarily a foliage feeder, and they'll feed on the outside of the fruit. They will not go into the inside of the fruit. And they're fairly easy to control with chemical treatments. So even BTs or Bacillus thuringiensis, they can be controlled if you catch them early. Next slide. This is a cutworm, In cutworms, generally we see at the very beginning of the season when a strawberry crop is newly transplanted, they can get into the crown of the strawberry plant of a new plant, and they can chew away there, and you don't, if you're not careful, you kind of need to be opening up the crown of these plants, pulling back the stems and looking down inside, making sure they're not there. And they're fairly easy to control, but you have to be on the lookout for them, because if you're not careful, next thing you see is you kind of see these plants that have died in a circle pattern out in your field, and you say, "Uh-oh, I think I know what that is." But that's kind of how they feed. They'll feed on one plant, and then they'll crawl over to the next plant, and then over to the next plant, and they kind of feed in a circle pattern. And they kind of hunker down in the soil at night. They like the cool moisture, so they'll hunker down in the soil. Next slide. Okay, this is our western flower thrip, and if you look down there on the far left-hand corner, here's the thrip running around on the flower, and what they're going to do is that they'll get on that flower, when the flower is immature like this, and they do a kind of a rasping, sucking type of damage, and this is where they end up bronzing the fruit, and you can get this flower as it develops with this bronzing all the way around the fruit, and you'll see, and it's pretty much a dead giveaway when the entire fruit is bronzed. There's other things that can bronze fruit, and you have to kind of look out for that. And some of it can be if you're doing some kind of chemical treatment and the product was a little bit too hot on a warm day, you might get bronzing, but then you're going to see it just on one side of the fruit. You're not likely to see it on the whole fruit. Or some varieties are more susceptible to bronzing when the sun comes out, and maybe you've had some cloudy days for an extended period of time, and it's been cloudy and cool, and suddenly you get a warm day, and you might start to see a little bit of bronzing. So this, for the thrips, usually the threshold level in the thrips, you're looking at about maybe 5 to 8 thrips per flower is you probably ought to be thinking about doing something, making some kind of a treatment. Next slide. Another pest that can infect us is aphids. And aphids will get on the underside of the leaves, and they'll start excreting they'll suck on the plant, on the leaves of the plant, so they start excreting juices, which kind of turns into honeydew. And the honeydew can be really, can start to smother a plant, make the plant sticky, and it can, and this honeydew can get on the fruit and make the fruit unmarketable. So the beauty of this pest is that if you're patient, oftentimes the ladybugs will come in and help you control this pest. So you just kind of have to kind of keep an eye on it. There's other materials that you'll be applying, that you could be applying to control the ligus, that are going to help you control this pest here, because they both do similar type of piercing of leaves or piercing of fruit. So, but oftentimes I've found that if you're patient with this crop, with this pest, then ladybugs can come in and help you control them. Next slide. Here's a pest that can be a problem late in the season, especially if your customer is going to go send fruit to the processor after he's done with his fresh market. And what happens is, because that crop is left on the plant a little bit longer, you start to kind of get this fermentation process going on out in the field, where you kind of start to smell the fruit, and kind of smells like fruit's getting overripe, and it really it's an attractant to fruit flies, and not just this particular fruit fly, but a number of different species of fruit flies. And what this fly does is it has an ovipositor on its posterior end, and it'll deposit the egg right inside the fruit. And on the left here, you can see a little white maggot coming out of that fruit. But they can do a lot of damage, and the processors don't like having maggots in their fruit, because this is fruit that's going to be whole fruit that's going to be, going into like frozen bags for the, for that side of the business. So, it's you got to kind of be on the lookout for this pest, and you kind of start treating for this preventatively when you're getting close to the tail end of the fresh market season. Next slide.
Anybody in the class ever seen this ever seen a fruit fly coming out of like a larvae or something like that? Raise your hand. Have you seen it in a grocery store, like something you bought in the grocery store, or was it in a field?
I saw it with Kyle's Botrytis trial last season. There was a lot of larvae in some of the fruit he had harvested.
So think about what your reaction would be if you bought a clamshell of berries and took them home, and then you saw these little maggots crawling out. So there's zero tolerance, right? People won't tolerate that kind of insect infestation.
Okay, real quick, a couple of foliar diseases that we can talk about, and there's a lot more foliar diseases, but these are the two primary ones that you kind of need to be aware of. And the first one is Botrytis, as you can see, it can make the fruit really unsightly, and a lot of times you get Botrytis when you have a lot of free moisture, like if you've had excessive rain. You can get Botrytis growing on the stems of the fruit and on the calyx and on the fruit itself. Next slide, Gerald. This is another picture of it. It's commonly referred to as gray mold, and it can actually start as a little pinhole right underneath the calyx of the fruit, or sometimes the petals of the flower will stick to the fruit, and if you get just the right amount of moisture. Usually morning dew is not too much of an issue, but free moisture like a light rain or a heavy rain will definitely get this little booger going. So you kind of got to be on the lookout for this, so it can make food unsightly. Next slide.
So unlike your fruit fly, this one everybody's seen, right? If you keep your strawberries in the refrigerator long enough, you'll see this one.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one is powdery mildew, and normally it's going to start showing up on the foliage first. So the picture on the right kind of shows the kind of a curling of the leaves, and if you look, if you look real close to these leaves, or you're in the field, you pick off the leaf, you can kind of see the mycelium growing on the outside of the leaf, and it's kind of a dead giveaway that you've got a problem. And eventually it moves to the calyx or the fruit itself. And in the picture on the left, this is actually on a red fruit, on a ripe fruit, but it'll show up on the green fruit, and so you kind of need to be on top of this one. And there's things like, there's chemical treatments for this, but there's also sulfur, and sulfur is organic. So a lot of growers do sulfur dusting for mildew, and there's also like potassium bicarbonate, which is like toothpaste, so to speak, that you could use to help control powdery mildew. Next slide. Okay, I want to briefly talk about soil-borne diseases. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here, but Caleb, you might be interested in this because looks like you're going to be dealing with this. But these are the 5 primary soil-borne diseases that you deal with, and because we lost methyl bromide, several years ago through a Montreal Protocol phase out, that's what used to help us control a lot of these diseases, and we don't have that anymore. So in the last probably 15 years, we've seen more and more of this, begin to show up, and my main takeaway here, you can go on to the next slide, Gerald. My main takeaway here on these diseases is that you want to get them identified. It might show up in the same field year after year in similar areas, and you pretty much say, well, it's macrophamina or it's fusarium. But my takeaway for you today is that always get it properly keyed out and identified. There's plenty of labs that can do this. I mean, the Cal Poly Center can do this for you. I'd say, an ounce of prevention here is worth a pound of gold, really. So the key takeaway, get it identified. Next slide. I want to get into a little bit about integrated pest management, and I'll let you look up the definition because there are several, but just to give you a little bit of insight. So next slide, Gerald. You have biological control, and in strawberries, we're very fortunate to have predatory mites that we can release to go after the two-spotted mite and the Lewis mite. And the beauty of these things is that if you've been involved with strawberries as a PCA and you've recommended releases of predatory mites, to see this work it's like a dream come true. To really see biological control in action is something to see. It's a sight to see for me. And the picture on the left is a Phytocilius persimilis, and the one on the right is a Neosillus californicus. I'll give you a little bit of strategy how I release these. Is that at the beginning of the season, I will recommend that a grower release the Neosillus californicus first. And the reason I do that is because the Neosillus can actually feed on other things beside two-spotted mites. So he's a little bit hardier and can survive, if there's not a lot of two-spot mite to feed on when you start to make your releases. And also it has activity on the Lewis mite. So if there's Lewis mite out there, you can start feeding on the Lewis mite. The persimilis on your left will not feed on the Lewis mite. It prefers the two-spotted mite to feed on. So I like to wait a little bit longer before I release this one. And they don't attack each other, so they interact with each other just fine. And oftentimes when I'm scouting the field and looking at my hand lens at these, I'll see them both on the same leaf, feeding on two spots. So that's always good to see, And my recommendation on these, most PCAs are recommending on strawberries for releases anywhere from a low of 25,000 to a high of 50,000 persimilis or californicus per acre, or a combination of the two. And these are reared in greenhouses. Some can be, there are some businesses here in California that grow biological, predatory mites, and there's some that come out of the country that you can order. And they either come in bean leaves if they've been reared on bean leaves, or they come, they extract them from the bean leaves and put them into vials that have vermiculite. They'll package them anywhere from 2,000 up to 10,000 up to 25,000 per vial, and then you release these in the field by hand. And I know there's some trials going on having these released with the what do they call those mini rovers that fly over the fields that God, I'm losing my thought process here, but they can fly by air.
That's the drones, right?
Drones, exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Yeah, I know there's some trials that people, and I think there's a company out there now that's touting the application with the drone for their releases. But
isn't that called Parabug, Jose?
Yeah, there's Parabug, and then I think there's another one called was it I think it's UAV or something like that.
That's just the name of the drones.
yeah.
No, yeah, but they named themselves that way.
Oh, really? Okay.
UAV something, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet, but I think it's a pretty interesting concept. Get these things released. It should sort of be a labor saving device. So, next slide, Gerald. Other forms of biological control is pheromone traps. Having traps out there so you can kind of see what your different pest populations you're doing. This happens to be a pheromone for a diamondback moth. One of the crops I take care of is Brussels sprouts, and Brussels sprouts is can be attacked by diamondback moth. The moth will come out and lay its eggs, and the larva can be very voracious, and their life cycle is very quick. So this is one way of kind of helping us guide what the moth populations are doing out there. Next slide. Another form of biological control in an organic sense or even a conventional sense is the application of rice bran into a field so that you can do anaerobic soil disinfestation. What's happening here in this picture is that the strawberry beds are being formed on your left, and they're actually working their way into the rice bran. So the rice bran is being folded into the body of the bed that's being formed. And then what'll happen is they'll come through and they'll lay drip tape, and then they'll lay plastic over the drip tape, and then they'll cut their roadways and hook up their plumbing, and then they'll start the water through the drip, and they'll kind of saturate this bed or get it close to saturation, and they'll keep it moist for 3 weeks so that this rice bran can begin to decompose and help with the diseases. So this is another form of biological control. Next slide. There's also Bycorosal fungi that can be applied to the roots of crops, or can be applied through the irrigation water, through drip irrigation, to try and increase those mycorrhizal zone, get things growing, around the roots so they can colonize the roots and help ward off disease, because there's nothing like a healthy plant that help you ward off diseases and soil-borne diseases. So, and there's other materials that can be used that you can learn about that they can be used through the drip, through irrigation also. Next slide. Cultural control. Plant resistant varieties. Different strains of strawberry crop or cultivars can resist certain diseases. So maybe in your geographic area there's varieties that can be grown that are resistant. Time of planting is important. When was the crop planted? What's the actual planting window for that crop? The use of plastic mulches, bird bombs, bird whistlers to scare away birds. Planting densities. How dense is your crop planted? The more air movement you've got around a plant, the less likely you're going to have diseases occurring. If your plants are really dense, sometimes you get more diseases growing in them. So, nutrition management is real important. How well is your crop being fed? And is it being fed properly? The picture on your right is a picture of someone doing a nutrient soil nutrient test, quick test, nitrogen quick test to see what's in the soil and how the crop's doing. So you can get this information back in a matter of a couple of days, 2 to 3 days, and then make a decision from there. Irrigation management is very important. If one of the easiest ways to damage a crop is either overwater it or underwater it. So irrigation is very important, and that can affect what your pest populations are doing and what your disease populations are doing. Next slide. Mechanical control or physical, using the bug vacuums to vacuum up ligus, or even moths that can lay corn earworm or beet armyworm. You could actually pull up some of the moths as they're flying in the field. Using tunnels or hoops to grow your crops in, that could act as a barrier for rain. So that's another physical control. Fences, to try to keep out pests, lessen the wind coming into your field. Bird netting, you keep birds away, and then mechanical cultivation of furrows for weeding, and then there's hand weeding. Next slide. And the last one is chemical control. And usually this is the one you want to avoid, but oftentimes is the one you use. So you want to be able to select the right active ingredient, for the pest that you're trying to control. And you want to rotate active ingredients. And I'll get into that in another slide here shortly, what I mean by that. Next slide. Okay, so when you're getting close to kind of making a decision, I wanted to jot down a few areas you might consider. And when writing your recommendation is pest and disease identification, properly identified, crop stage, weather, what beneficial insects are out there, or are you trying to protect beneficial insects? How's your crop doing, nutrition-wise, irrigation-wise? What chemicals are available? How compatible are they together? Consider the re-entry intervals and the pre-harvest intervals. If you're dealing with the crop with strawberries, once they're in the peak of season where they're harvesting every day, re-entry and pre-harvest becomes really important because you have to make decisions with your harvest people as to when's the best time to spray. And then you want to consider the activities that are going on around your field or in your field. Is there a harvest crew in there? Is there a weeding crew? What's going on next door with your neighbor? Is there somebody harvesting next door? Is there a crew next door? Are you next to houses? What's the best time to spray if you're in an urban area? Do you have to contact some of these people to let them know that you're going to spray? That could be part of your job, that you're going to have to deal with the public. And then material residue levels. If the crop's being exported, there are certain countries that they're going to have tolerances on these active ingredients as to how much it's allowed. So, when can you harvest based on those tolerances? So you might have to make a decision of which material to use, or find an alternate material if the one you use isn't going to meet the requirements for that country where that fruit's going to be exported. Next slide. As I mentioned, available chemicals, what's available, situational knowledge, be aware of what's going on around your field. And, like I mentioned, houses, crews, people, maybe there's a bike path, but on the weekends, there's a lot of people riding their bikes or joggers coming by. So that's all things you have to consider. Rotating FRAC or IRAC groups. And what that FRAC means, Fungicide Resistance Action Committee, and IRAC means Insecticide Resistance Action Committee. And these are groups of modes of action of active ingredients. And what you want to do is you don't want to build up resistance with fungicides or insecticides. So the chemicals or the active ingredients that are registered on the crop you're making recommendations on, you want to rotate these chemistries. You don't want to keep using the same one, back to back. But the label on the active ingredients will tell you how many times it can be used on a crop, and how often you should rotate. And so the main takeaway here is you need to rotate chemistries and rotate modes of action, because you want to avoid building up resistance. Next slide. Biological decisions. I talked about releasing the biological, predators out there. Predatory mites. And are you considering a generalist, or are you being more specific with your predators? If you're going to introduce predatory mites, you want to, or biological fungi, you don't want to do it when you're going to do a pesticide application or an active ingredient that's going to affect that predator or that beneficial fungi. So you have to take that into consideration, and then try to choose chemicals that are not hard on beneficials. And fortunately nowadays, and I've been in the business a long time, we used to have a lot of harsh chemicals back in the day, but we've gotten to a lot more chemistries that are so much more easier on the environment and easier on beneficials. So you have that to consider when making decisions. Next slide. Real quick, I wanted to touch on communications, and You know, if you're in the business, you know, somewhere along the line, something's going to go wrong or something's not going to look right. And, you know, I could go on and on. I could teach a class on this, but I'm just going to, I wanted to put this picture in here. And this is an application that didn't go right. And there was a herbicide applied on this field. This is a field of green onions, and you maybe kind of see them coming up through the in the picture there on your right hand side. But they applied a herbicide over this field, and when the applicator was doing the application, he wasn't pressurizing the tractor at the end of the field before he started his pass. So that's why you see this chevron pattern. You know, so you're going to have situations arise in the field, and you're going to have to figure out what it is that went wrong. And some are going to be real obvious, like this one. I mean, this one, when I drove by this field, I knew what was wrong. I didn't have to ask any questions, you know, but you're going to have other situations where maybe something's not as obvious, you know, and you're going to have to kind of be kind of an inspector and try to, you know, decide what went wrong here, you know, and how can we do better next time. So communication is going to be real important. This slide, yeah, you can go to the next slide. Okay, Agrion is you know, an app that we have to write recommendations, and there's Agrion is fantastic with having all the labels that are registered in California, and you can look these labels up. So as I was speaking earlier, you can do it from anywhere you want, from, you know, in the seat of your pickup or your office or your home, or you can look these labels up. So we use these to write recommendations. We can also file notices of intent if we need to notify the county of a product that we're going to apply. You can use it to use pesticide use reports, because you do 100% use reporting in California. So anything you apply has to be reported to the county after it's been completed. And you can use crop histories, do crop histories. So sometimes your grower customer may want a crop history on what you've been doing. He may need it for you know, for someone he's selling the fruit to, you know, where the fruit's being sold to, or they just want to have a copy of it. And there's a lot of other reports that can be done in Agrion, but I just wanted to kind of mention just a few of them. Next slide. And this is a recommendation and that I wrote up, and the main takeaway here is that when you're putting your products into the recommendation, you want to put them in the position in which the applicator or the mixer is going to pour them into the mix tank, because that's pretty important, because if you can clog things up pretty quickly if you don't do it in sequence. And usually you have the applicator fill the spray tank 1/2 to 3/4 full. You know, you put in your water soluble bags if a product comes in a bag, and then your water dispersible products, wettable powders, you know, suspension concentrates, on and so forth, and you just keep going, and you know, you do your liquids last, and then if you're doing like soluble fertilizers that are soluble in water, then you're going to do those. You can do those towards the end because they're very soluble, so generally they'll go into solution very easily, and then you have them add the remaining amount of water. So my main takeaway is there's a method to the madness, and you need to pay attention to that. Next slide.
What happens if you do it wrong?
Well, you might get away with it, but the guys that are mixing it in the field, you know, might say, hey, you know, I'm having trouble mixing this, or it's not mixing right, you know, and then when they load it onto the tractor, if it's not properly mixed, you know, the nozzles can get clogged up on the tractor.
Gotcha.
So that it's going to save somebody some time if it's done correctly. And with your recommendation, you always provide a map, you know, and nowadays, because of, you know, Google Maps and Measure Maps, you know, you can do a map from anywhere you're at. So I can write a recommendation from my pickup and send it to my office. They can print it and send them a map. They can print it, and the applicator can have it before I even go back to the office, or maybe I don't even need to go to the office. But you know, there's the beauty in having the tools that we have nowadays. You know, we used to have to write these things by hand back in the day, and draw the maps by hand. So it's a huge labor saving device. Next. This is just a copy of a product use report. That, I just wanted to show you one of the reports you can generate, from it. So next slide. What I want to talk about here is that, your customer base is, going to be farmers or, more than likely it's going to be a farmer, but maybe your customer might be the company that owns the crop. Maybe the farmer is just growing the crop on contract. So your customer might be the general, the people that are paying you for your services. You're working for the grower, he's contracted out for you to do his services, but somebody else is going to pay your bills. So, developing relationships with your customers, you got to know who they are, who's the customer, your customer could be your coworkers also. So one of the things I could really stress is that internships are really important. That's one way to get out in the industry and learn to see if you really like something, find out a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what goes on in the pest control industry. Obviously networking, networking with people, and you do that throughout your lifetime, participating in the industry and, in different organizations, attending grower meetings, and something you might not like, but if you're a PCA and you have customers, sometimes you might have to make a cold call. And if you're out there doing your networking and meeting people, then cold calls aren't so bad. So, but I just wanted to kind of throw that at you, so you're kind of aware of it. The young lady on your left, she's actually a certified crop advisor, and that actually works for us at Tri-Tec Ag Products. She's our in-house agronomist. So, so we rely on her for a lot of information, and she's a wealth of knowledge and helps us in our jobs. And the gentleman on your right, he's a grower. He's a strawberry grower. He's been growing strawberries in Ventura County, I think, since the mid 80s. Very, very, very knowledgeable, and we learn a lot from him. So next slide. Okay. Many of you may or may have not done an assessment of yourself, a personal assessment. I highly recommend this. And this is not a measure of success. This tells you kind of what kind of person you are, because if you're going to be in the pest control business, and you're going to be in sales and dealing with people, you don't need to be any one of these particularly. You can be very successful at any one of these levels, or any one of these quadrants. I tend to be on the S with a little bit of C. That's who I am. And when I first got into the business, somebody told me, they said, "Do you know what a pest control advisor is?" And I said, "Well, I said," and I started explaining to them what I knew, and he said, "No, you're a salesman." So that I kind of took a step back, and and I said, "Well, I don't know if I see myself as a salesman, but I've actually been a salesman for the last 39, 40 years." So it's not so bad, but I think my main takeaway here is that get to know who you are, because it'll give you an easier time in dealing with your customers and your coworkers and the people you network with. Last slide. And that, my friends, I will leave you with if you have any questions.
Thank you, Hector. I think you can all see that we took quite a while, and there were still, and not even going into a ton of depth on any of that. So you could see that we could spend an entire quarter on just the insect pest. We could spend another quarter on diseases, and another one on fertilization, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot there. We have time for questions. I know that we've gone a little bit longer than normal, but let's entertain some questions. I wanted to ask you one to get this started, Hector. at this stage in your career, how would you gain or lose a customer?
Well, first of all, if I was looking for a customer, I would, in my geographic area, I pretty much know everybody. The people I don't know is, I don't know a lot of citrus and avocado people. So if I was calling on a citrus or avocado grower, then I'd pretty much be cold calling. So, I'd either call them up and see if I could set up a meeting, or see if I could catch up to him someplace if I became aware of where his farms are, his locations are, and I might catch up to him, or I might ask somebody who I thought knew him or her. They could introduce me to him, so that would be one way to approach it. In terms of, other strawberry customers, I would feel pretty confident just, meeting somebody, cold calling somebody, just because of, my years of experience, that I could go in and talk shop with somebody fairly easily.
How about losing a customer?
losing
Not
a
necessarily
customer-
you, but anybody.
Well, losing a customer, a lot of times, if you're in the retail side of the business, if you're with a retail, dealer that working in an area, if they're not satisfied with the work you're doing on a crop, maybe you've had a lot of pest infestation, or they've had crop losses, or you haven't been able to control something, or they felt you were negligent, you might lose a customer. They might go to another retailer. So you could lose a customer that way.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the class?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Sam.
What would you say to like newcomers, PCAs like ourselves coming into the business? Like, what would be the main points to take away, and the key points to look forward to?
I would say that you would, well, obviously, as I stressed earlier, if you can do an internship, getting yourself into the business, then that's a really good way to start, because you can start networking and start, gaining knowledge, with other veteran PCAs who can help you out. But the other thing is that, you don't want to come across with your customers like you know it all, because it takes, we've got a couple guys that have come out of, actually we have three PCAs, three younger PCAs that have come out of Cal Poly. And it takes them about 2 to 3 years to kind of get their feet on the ground and feeling comfortable with, with dealing with customers and being able to write recommendations confidently. So, you don't want to take yourself too seriously, but you want to be humble enough and provide the information. You can bring information to customers, and that's a lot of times what we'll do is we'll say, well, hey, take this to a customer, and just start a dialogue, start talking. You don't have to be an expert, but you have to be willing to be upfront with somebody. And if you don't know, say, I don't know. And if you make a mistake, say, I made a mistake, and you live, you go on, just because, I've made a lot of mistakes over the years, and, there's been crops I've burned, and, I've had to pay for them, and they're just things you learn over the years. But I say, be honest, be upfront, be humble, be willing to research information. That's always important. You have the beauty of the internet now that we didn't have back then. So there's so much information that can be had, and get to know the people in the area in which you're working. Like I mentioned earlier, get to know the farm advisors, get to know the UC Cooperative Extension specialist, and attend meetings, ask questions. That's really the way to get started, and have respect for the people that have been in the business a long time. They can teach you things, I always tell the young guys that, we hired them because they're experts on the internet, and they can help us so much with the computers and everything. So I've always encouraged them, and it's gotten to the point where sometimes I ask them questions, because they're starting to walk crops, and and make recommendations. So sometimes I'll say, hey, what are you seeing here? Tell me what you're seeing. Talk to me about it.
Why so long? 3 years is a long time. And one thing that is difficult nowadays is patience, right? We want to get there fast.
Yeah, yeah.
So why such a long time? Why can't we get up to speed in 6 months?
Well, you have to learn the crop cycles, and every year, even though you may be walking the same crop, every year is different. There's always something that's going to be different about that year and that crop, so things are always changing, and it may not take you 3 years. I mean, we might, somebody might throw you out there sooner, might be able to guide you through it sooner, but to really to learn the crop cycles, it takes about 3 years. Like I said, I started learning cotton, 2.5 years ago, and this will be my third year with cotton, and I'm still learning. The first year I did I'll tell you what I did the first year is that there's a gentleman in the Central Valley, in the San Juan Valley, that they consider the cotton guru PCA. Well, I didn't know who he was, but I got in contact with a manufacturer's rep that knew him, and he set up a meeting with me, and I met with him a couple times, and then he actually met me in the field once and kind of showed me what to look for. And here I was at that time I was 59 years old, and he's telling me what to look at, and he was probably a few years younger than I was, but not by much. But here's this guru, and I made it a point to network with him, and also I got a hold of the J.G. Boswell Company, because they're big in cotton over there, and I got a hold of a couple of their PCAs, and I met with them, and then I've been networking with one of their PCAs, just asking them questions in the last couple of years, just to so I can feel my way through this crop. So there's knowledge to be had.
Always important to be humble enough to learn from those who know more.
Yeah,
no matter what stage of your career you're in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Other questions?
I have one question. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Yu-Chen.
Thank you. Is there any liability issue because you make recommendation and maybe that recommendation doesn't work, or you just lose the customer?
No, absolutely, and and like I said, over the years, there's crops that I've burned. I put something wrong on the recommendation, or it didn't get applied correctly. And I'll give you an example. I was taking care of a tomato crop, and I was going to apply a herbicide that gets applied over the top of the plant. So the herbicide itself is not going to hurt the plant, but when I wrote the recommendation, I needed to write it up as what they call a banded application. That means the rate was going to be only like about 6 to 8 ounces per acre. Well, when I wrote the recommendation, I wrote it up as a broadcast application. So the rate was like 2 pints. So we ended up burning the crop. I mean, the crop grew out of it, but we ended up initially burning that crop. So we had to make a monetary adjustment to that customer. We didn't lose the customer, but because we were upfront and honest, and we said, hey, look, we'll make you whole. We made a monetary adjustment. And companies, retailers, and even independents, you have insurance in case you get a crop, what they call a crop claim. But things can happen, things can go wrong, and I'll give you another example. I had written up a spray job with a helicopter over a weekend, and this was a long time ago. And I actually left town, and so I knew the application was going to take place on a Sunday with the helicopter. And it got really warm that weekend. The temperature got into the low 90s, and the material I was using was it was an emulsifiable concentrate, which created a very hot material. And because it got so hot that day, that we ended up spotting this cabbage crop, and we had to pay for the crop because it was unmarketable. So, but those things happen.
Thank you.
Good question.
Jose, did you have a question?
Yeah. So you touched a little bit on the insect stuff, and I wanted to know what your point of view is on the future of IPM and insects with growing resistance to what's out there now as far as chemicals, and there not being new chemicals coming anytime soon. How do you think that's going to shape the PCA world in the future?
Very good question. And we're seeing, in the last, probably in the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of change to softer chemistries. A lot of stuff that's like bacillus and, biological fungi, and we're getting more, from a technical standpoint, we're getting more like resistant varieties, and the work that's being done at universities and now being done at Cal Poly, it's a tremendous help. And I think we're slowly going to get away from the harsher chemicals. There's a lot of stuff that we don't even use anymore. There's stuff that works so much better than some of these harsher chemicals. And I'm not advocating 100% organic, because I'm also an organic grower. But because I'm an organic grower, I've learned to use a lot of things that I use in the organic crop, I can now use in my conventional crop, because I got a comfort level using it, and I got to learn what the tolerances are, and when do I pull the trigger, on an application. So the best answer to your question, I think there's a lot of products that are coming down the pipeline, and a lot of research that's being done, and research is so important, and so much money is spent on developing new products, and it can take a decade to come out with a new product. But I think so much more is available now, and we know so much more about the interaction between what's going on in the soil, all the biological fungi that's going on in the soil. We're learning so much more every day that I think we're going to be able to, we're going to fight this one, and we're going to come out on top. Our industry is very resilient, and it's that resiliency that's going to add to our success going into the future. And and young people coming along, I mean, you've had such an opportunity to learn so much more than I did when I was sitting where you're sitting, and I think that's going to be a big key.
Thank you, Hector. Any other final questions? Let's thank Hector for a great seminar. Hector, really appreciate you donating your time today and for all the work you put into preparing this. If there are other questions, can we reach out to you by email?
Oh, absolutely. I think you've got my email, so no, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
If you think of something, just shoot me an email.
Will do.